The amber light of Denver's early evening painted the restaurant's windows gold as I smoothed my dress one final time. Six place settings gleamed before me, each fork and knife positioned with the kind of precision that comes from wanting everything to be perfect. I'd arrived 15 minutes early, a habit born from years of being the one who made sure things went smoothly. "Party of six?" the hostess had asked, and I'd nodded with the kind of confidence that masks uncertainty. Yes, six, my mother Velma, my sister Zanea, my brother Curtis, and two family friends who'd become fixtures at our gatherings over the years. Plus me, of course, the birthday girl, 33 years old today, and for the first time in months, I felt something approaching optimism. Maybe this dinner would be different. Maybe they'd actually show up on time. Maybe Zanea wouldn't spend the entire meal on her phone. Or Curtis wouldn't dominate the conversation with his latest get-rich-quick scheme. Maybe Velma would remember it was my birthday without me having to remind her. The waiter appeared at my elbow young, probably working his way through college, with the kind of practiced smile that says he's seen it all. "Would you like to start with drinks, or shall we wait for your party?" "They're just running a little late," I said, adjusting my napkin. The lie came easily. I'd been making excuses for them my entire life. "I'll wait." 6:47. I checked my phone, scrolling through empty notifications. No missed calls, no texts explaining traffic or last-minute delays. Just the usual digital noise of a world that kept spinning whether you felt forgotten or not. I'd chosen this restaurant carefully, Harvest Moon, a place that struck the perfect balance between special and accessible, not so expensive that Curtis would complain about the prices, not so casual that Zanea would feel underdressed. The kind of place that said, "You matter enough for me to plan this." Without shouting it, my phone buzzed. The text was from Velma, my mother. Three words that would replay in my mind for days afterward. "You're not our priority right now. Enjoy your dinner." I stared at the screen, reading it once, twice, then a third time. Not happy birthday, not running late, not even a lie about unexpected circumstances, just those 13 words, delivered with the casual cruelty of someone who'd already moved on. The waiter returned, this time carrying a small wrapped package. "Someone dropped this off earlier for you," he said, setting it beside my untouched bread plate. "Said it was from your family." I managed to thank him without my voice cracking. The wrapping was elegant matte gold paper with crisp edges, the kind Zanea always insisted upon for important occasions. Inside, nestled in tissue paper, was a silk scarf, pale blue, delicate, beautiful, and familiar. I'd bought this exact scarf for my mother last Christmas. I remembered everything about it, the boutique where I'd found it. The way the saleswoman had folded it just so, even the tiny snag near the edge where Velma had caught it on her wedding ring. The card tucked beneath the tissue paper confirmed it, "Happy birthday from all of us." But underneath, faint but visible, was my own handwriting from 11 months ago. "Love you always, Mom." They hadn't even bothered to buy a new card. I set the scarf back in its box with steady hands. Around me, the restaurant hummed with life couples celebrating anniversaries, friends catching up over wine, a family with young children who couldn't sit still. The world kept turning, people kept choosing each other, and I sat alone at a table set for six with a recycled gift and a message that made their priorities crystal clear. I didn't cry. That would come later, or maybe not at all. Instead, I lifted my wine glass. I'd ordered a bottle of their mid-range Pinot Noir, enough for a small celebration, and took a slow sip. The weight in my chest wasn't heartbreak, not yet. It was recognition. The uncomfortable truth that I'd been avoiding for years was finally demanding acknowledgement. This wasn't forgetfulness. This was deliberate. By the time I returned to my apartment, Denver had settled into its evening rhythm. I dropped my purse on the counter, kicked off the heels I'd worn for an audience that never materialized, and sat on the edge of my couch like someone still waiting for guests to arrive. My phone sat silent on the coffee table, its black screen reflecting the city lights beyond my window. I shouldn't have picked it up. I knew better, but something in me needed to understand what had been more important than showing up for my birthday. Instagram loaded slowly, each notification a small reminder of a life I'd been excluded from. Zanea had posted 43 minutes ago. The image took a moment to process, like a puzzle my brain didn't want to solve. There they were, all of them. Velma, Zanea, Curtis, even Uncle Ray, who hadn't been invited to a family gathering since the incident with Dad's will 2 years ago. They stood in front of Marina Restaurant in Boulder, an hour's drive from where I'd sat alone, holding champagne flutes and wearing the kind of radiant smiles that only come from genuine celebration. Curtis stood center stage, arms spread wide like a conquering hero. In his right hand, a set of motorcycle keys caught the light. The caption read, "Celebrating the dreamer. He finally made it happen. At family had dreams, hash new beginnings." My stomach dropped. I zoomed in on the photo, searching for details that might make this make sense. Velma wore the same scarf they'd just given me my scarf, the one I'd bought for her with my own money. On Curtis's wrist was a watch I recognized immediately. Sleek, silver, expensive. The same model he'd texted me about 2 months ago, asking if it was too much for his budget. "I can't afford it anyway," he'd said when I'd advised against the purchase. "Just dreaming." But there it was, gleaming on his wrist at a party funded by. I opened my banking app with trembling fingers. There it was, last Tuesday. Wire transfer to Curtis Jennings, $1 to $500. The memo line read, "Emergency rent assistance." He'd called me crying, saying his landlord was threatening eviction, that he was scared and didn't know what else to do. He wasn't scared. He was shopping. They hadn't forgotten my birthday. They'd made other plans. With my money, I set the phone down and walked to my laptop, muscle memory guiding me through the familiar motions of opening a new spreadsheet. At the top, I typed, "Support unreciprocated." Below that, I began listing what I could remember. Car loan assistance Curtis, Tito $800, mortgage bridge payments, Velma $5, $200, emergency dental for Zanea's son, $600. Rent assistance, motorcycle celebration, $1,500. The numbers stared back at me, clinical and damning. No receipts, no thank yous, no invitations to the parties my generosity had funded. I copied the photo from Zanea's post and pasted it beside the last entry. A visual reminder of where my kindness had gotten me. Excluded, forgotten, used. My phone buzzed with a new notification. Another Instagram story from Zanea. This one a video of Curtis revving his new motorcycle's engine while the family cheered. I watched my brother, my baby brother, who I'd bailed out more times than I could count, grinning like he'd earned every moment of that celebration. I closed the laptop and sat in the growing darkness of my apartment, finally understanding the weight that had been settling in my chest for months. This wasn't about one missed dinner or one forgotten birthday. This was about a pattern I'd been too generous, too hopeful, too willing to see the best in people to recognize. I wasn't their daughter, their sister, their family member. I was their bank account with a heartbeat. The next morning arrived gray and uninviting, matching the mood that had settled over me like a thick blanket. I made coffee and sat at my kitchen table, laptop open, cursor blinking in the spreadsheet I'd started the night before. But numbers only told part of the story. The real damage lived in the spaces between the moments I'd been cropped out of my own life. I created a new tab and titled it Emotional Overdrafts. Then I began to excavate memories I'd buried under layers of excuses and false hope. Zanea's wedding, 3 years ago. I'd been seated at table 12, near the back, next to the photographer's assistant and someone's plus one whose name I never learned. When Zanea gave her speech thanking my amazing family, she'd looked directly at Velma and Curtis, her eyes sliding past me like I was part of the wallpaper. I'd spent the reception taking pictures of everyone else's joy, helping coordinate the timeline, making sure the cake was cut on schedule. In the professional photos that arrived weeks later, I appeared in exactly 3 images, all of them taken from behind as I worked. Christmas Eve, 2 years running. While everyone else gathered around the tree for the traditional family photo, Velma would send me to the kitchen. Just help with the vegetables real quick, she'd say, and I'd emerge 20 minutes later with a perfectly arranged platter to find the photo session complete. "Oh, you were here?" Uncle Ray had asked last year, like my presence was a surprise rather than a given. Dad's funeral. The memory of that day still made my chest tight. I'd handled everything, the arrangements, the flowers, the reception, the thank you cards to people who'd sent condolences. While Curtis gave the eulogy and Zanea played grieving daughter for the assembled crowd, I'd ensured that everything ran smoothly, that Dad was honored properly, that no detail was overlooked. At the reception afterward, person after person had approached Velma and my siblings to offer comfort, while I'd stood at the edges, making sure the catering stayed on schedule and the guest book made its way around the room. I'd been too busy taking care of everyone else to properly mourn my own father. The pattern was clear now, written in 1,000 small erasures. I wasn't part of the family narrative. I was the supporting staff that made the narrative possible. The one who funded their dreams and cleaned up their messes and ensured their comfort, all while remaining carefully invisible in the final edit. My phone rang, jarring me from my excavation of old wounds. Mara's name appeared on the screen, my coworker and one of the few people who'd noticed when I'd seemed off yesterday. "Hey," I answered, not trusting my voice with more than a single syllable. "I need to give you a heads up," she said without preamble. "My aunt ran into your mom at the grocery store yesterday. She mentioned your birthday, and your mom, well, she said you were being dramatic, that you've always been a bit much, and that you're exaggerating things for attention." The coffee cup in my hands grew heavy. "She said that to your aunt? Someone she barely knows. I'm sorry. I thought you should know the story she's telling." After we hung up, I sat staring at my reflection in the laptop screen. So that was how this would play out. Not only would I be excluded and erased, but my absence would be rewritten as my fault. My silence would be transformed into evidence of my instability, my hurt into proof of my dysfunction. I opened a new document and began typing, not an angry screed or a plea for understanding, but a simple record of facts, dates, amounts, occasions, witnesses, the objective truth that couldn't be gaslit or rewritten or explained away. If they wanted to tell stories about me, they'd have to contend with the receipts first. 3 days passed in a strange kind of clarity. I went to work, handled my responsibilities, came home to my quiet apartment, and felt something I hadn't experienced in years: peace. Not happiness exactly, but the absence of the constant low-grade anxiety that had become my baseline. No urgent texts about family emergencies. No last-minute requests for financial help. No carefully worded manipulations disguised as invitations. Just silence. And in that silence, I began to hear my own voice again. On Thursday morning, I was reviewing my mortgage account, a shared responsibility since Dad's death, when I noticed an unfamiliar document in the pending folder. Property Ownership Revision. Filed 2 weeks ago. I clicked it open with growing unease. The original deed had listed three names: Velma Jennings, Curtis Jennings, and Aileen M. Jennings. The revision showed only two. My name had been cleanly removed, replaced with additional ownership percentages for my mother and brother. At the bottom, three signature lines. Two were filled in with familiar handwriting. The third bore what was supposed to be my signature. I stared at the screen, my coffee growing cold. I'd never seen this document before, never been asked to sign anything, never been consulted about removing my name from the property I'd helped save with my own money. But there it was, my signature forged with the kind of casual fraud that suggested they'd done this before. I called the county clerk's office, my hands steady despite the adrenaline coursing through my system. After several transfers, I reached a woman whose tired voice suggested she'd fielded similar calls before. "Yes, ma'am. The revision was processed," she confirmed after I provided the file number. "Submitted in person with notarization." "Was there proper identification for all parties?" I asked. A pause. "Let me check the supporting documentation." Another pause. Longer this time. "I see identification for two parties, but the third signature. There's no ID on file for Aileen Jennings, just the signature page." "Because I never signed it," I said quietly. "That's not my signature." "Oh." Her voice shifted, becoming more formal. "In that case, ma'am, I'd recommend contacting a property attorney immediately. This could constitute fraud." Fraud. The word hung in the air after I ended the call. My own family had forged my signature to steal my inheritance. Not through emotional manipulation or guilt tripping this time, but through actual prosecutable crime. I researched property attorneys for an hour before finding one with good reviews and reasonable rates. The email I sent was brief and professional. "I need to discuss potential real estate fraud involving forged signatures and unauthorized property transfer. I have documentation of the fraudulent filing and can provide evidence of financial contributions to the property in question. Please advise on next steps." I attached the forged document, screenshots of my banking records showing mortgage payments, and copies of the original deed. Then I hit send before I could second guess myself. For the first time in my adult life, I wasn't trying to protect my family from the consequences of their actions. I was protecting myself from their abuse. The reply came within hours. "This appears to be a clear case of forgery and property fraud. We should meet as soon as possible to discuss legal remedies and file the necessary injunctions." I scheduled the appointment for the following Monday and closed my laptop. Outside my window, Denver's skyline gleamed in the afternoon sun, the mountains beyond promising the kind of clarity that only comes from elevation. I felt like I was finally climbing toward higher ground. The knock came on Friday evening, soft but insistent. I'd been expecting it, had even prepared for it in a way. When you start setting boundaries with people who've never respected them, they don't simply accept the new rules. They escalate. I opened the door to find Velma holding a pastel gift bag, the kind you grab at a pharmacy when you need to appear thoughtful on short notice. Her smile was stretched tight across her face, every line of it telegraphing effort. "I thought we could talk," she said, stepping past me before I could respond. "Like adults." She perched on the edge of my couch as if my furniture might contaminate her clothes, and I remained standing. There was no version of this conversation where I made myself smaller to accommodate her comfort. "I know how things looked the other night," she began, smoothing her palms against her jeans. "But we honestly thought you might need some space after everything you've been going through." I let the words hang in the air for a moment. What exactly have I been going through? Well, you've seemed so distant lately, so stressed. We thought maybe a quiet birthday would be better for you. The audacity was breathtaking. They'd excluded me from my own birthday celebration and were now reframing it as thoughtful consideration for my mental health. And Curtis's motorcycle party, I asked. Was that also for my benefit? Her expression flickered just for a second before resettling into practiced innocence. I don't know what you mean. The party at Marina Restaurant, the one funded by the $1,500 Curtis borrowed for emergency rent, the one where you all celebrated his new motorcycle while I sat alone at a table I'd reserved for six. You're being dramatic, she said, her voice sharpening. You always take everything so personally, like the world is out to get you. There it was, the family classic, the greatest hit that never failed to make me question my own perception of reality. But this time, instead of the familiar stab of self-doubt, I felt something cleaner, certainty. No, I said, my voice calm and clear. I just stopped lying for you. Her mouth twitched. Not quite a smile, not quite a frown. The uncomfortable recognition of someone who'd been seen through. I didn't come here to apologize, she said, leaning back and crossing her arms. I came here because I don't want people thinking we abandoned you. Of course, it wasn't about guilt or love or family. It was about optics. I walked to the kitchen and retrieved the folder I'd prepared, the one filled with bank statements and screenshots and documented evidence of their financial abuse. I handed her a single page, a clean, comprehensive breakdown of every dollar I'd contributed to the family over the past 5 years. She glanced at it, her fingers tightening around the paper. The numbers were undeniable: $1,800 to $400 in direct financial support, plus countless smaller contributions for groceries, utilities, emergency expenses, money that had flowed in one direction only, funding their lives while mine remained carefully invisible. This, I said, is who you've been talking about behind my back. The person who kept your lights on and your mortgage current and your son's teeth fixed. Tell me again how I'm being dramatic. She stared at the paper for a long moment, then looked up at me. For the first time in our conversation, her mask slipped entirely. I saw not my mother, but a woman who'd been caught, who knew she'd been caught, and who was calculating her next move. You'll regret this once you're alone, she said, standing and adjusting her coat like armor. When you're sitting in this apartment with no one who cares about you, you'll remember that family is all you have. I walked her to the door, my steps steady and sure. I've already been alone, I said as she stepped into the hallway. This time it's by choice. I closed the door quietly and turned the lock. Then I leaned my forehead against the wood, breathing in the weight of what had just happened. Not sadness, not victory, just release. The silence that followed wasn't empty. It was full of possibility. The next morning, I began the systematic process of untangling my life from theirs. It was surprisingly complex. Years of shared accounts and services and obligations had created a web of connection that required careful cutting. First, the digital ties. I removed my payment information from the grocery delivery service that had been sending weekly orders to Velma's house, canceled the shared streaming accounts, the cloud storage, the family phone plan where I'd been covering everyone's devices for 3 years. Each cancellation felt like removing a small weight I hadn't realized I'd been carrying. The group chat was harder. For 20 minutes, I stared at the screen, watching their messages pile up. Velma emergency family meeting tonight. 8 p.m. sharp. Zanea, can we please keep it civil this time? Curtis, what's this about? I can't deal with drama right now. Velma, ask your sister. She'll have plenty to say. They were talking about me like I wasn't there, making plans around my absence while keeping me technically included. the perfect metaphor for our entire relationship. I took screenshots of the conversation, then muted the chat. Then I deleted it entirely. Not in anger, but in the same spirit I'd canceled the other service's practical maintenance of my own peace. My email brought news from the attorney. Injunction filed to prevent any further property transfers. We'll need to meet Monday to discuss criminal charges for the forgery. Criminal charges. The phrase should have made me feel guilty, but it didn't. They'd committed a crime against me, and pretending otherwise wouldn't protect anyone except the perpetrators. That afternoon, Zanea posted a new photo on Instagram, a tightly cropped shot of the family around a dinner table, all warm lighting and intimate conversation. The caption read, "Even when someone chooses to disappear, family still stands together. Hash family. First, hash grateful, hash stay strong." The comments poured in like they always did. "Hope everything's okay. You guys are so strong. Praying for your family during this difficult time." I screenshot the post and added it to my growing file of documentation. Let them craft whatever narrative they needed. I had the receipts. Sunday afternoon, I drove to Sunset Manor with a chocolate cake from the grocery store and a single candle tucked in my purse. The cake wasn't anything special. Basic sheet cake with vanilla frosting, but it was mine. I'd bought it for myself, for a celebration I was choosing, rather than one I was desperately hoping for. Edith was sitting by the window in the common room, working on a crossword puzzle with the intense concentration of someone who had all the time in the world. She looked up when I approached, her face breaking into a genuine smile. "Well, would you look at that?" she said, folding her puzzle in half. "What's the occasion? Belated birthday celebration?" I said, setting the cake on the small table between us. "For myself," she chuckled, the sound warm and knowing. "You're the only person I know who brings her own cake to her own party." "With exactly one candle," I added, pulling out the tiny birthday candle I'd brought. "And no guest list to disappoint me." I lit the candle with a match from the lobby desk. The flame flickered weakly in the afternoon sun, streaming through the windows. But it felt more meaningful than any elaborate celebration my family might have planned. We shared the cake in comfortable quiet, drinking lukewarm coffee from the care center's mismatched mugs. It wasn't fancy, but I felt more seen and celebrated in that simple moment than I had in years of family gatherings. "I never had a daughter," Edith said after we'd finished eating. "But if I had, I think I would have wanted one like you, like me. Stubborn, not soft, the kind of girl who doesn't wait for someone to offer her a chair, just drags one over and sits down." She paused, studying my face. "Takes courage to celebrate yourself when everyone else forgot to." "What if they didn't forget?" I asked quietly. "What if they just chose not to remember?" Edith reached across the table and patted my hand, her fingers warm and papery. "Then you chose right by remembering yourself." The drive home felt different, lighter. I'd spent so many years waiting for other people to mark the important moments in my life that I'd forgotten I could honor them myself. The birthday that had started with such pain had ended with something better than cake and champagne clarity. My phone was buzzing when I got home. 3 missed calls from Velma, 2 from Curtis, and a string of voicemails I didn't listen to. Whatever crisis they thought they were facing, whatever emergency they needed my money or my labor or my silence to solve, it would have to wait. I was done being their emergency contact. Monday morning brought official resolution in the form of legal documents and attorney fees that felt like the best money I'd ever spent. The injunction had been granted, freezing any further changes to the property until the forgery investigation was complete. More importantly, I'd filed to have my name completely removed from all shared assets, not through fraud this time, but through my own choice. The criminal investigation will take time. my attorney explained during our meeting. But the civil remedies are straightforward. You can sever all financial ties immediately if that's what you want. It was exactly what I wanted. By Wednesday, my name had been legally removed from the mortgage, the shared bank accounts, and every other financial entanglement that had bound me to people who saw me only as a resource to be exploited. I came home that evening to find an envelope slipped under my door. Inside, a single sheet of paper with 3 words in Velma's careful handwriting: "Please come home, home," as if the place where I'd been erased and excluded and gaslit for years had ever been home. As if home was somewhere you had to beg to belong, rather than somewhere you were welcomed and valued and seen. I lit a candle at my kitchen table, the same one I'd used with Edith, and wrote myself a note on my good stationery. "Happy birthday, Aileen. You were worth showing up for." Then I opened my laptop and created a new document, "What I Owe Myself," Chapter 1. The first line came easily: "You are allowed to leave the table when love is no longer being served." The silence lasted exactly 1 week. Then the phone calls started. Not from my immediate family, they'd apparently learned that direct contact wouldn't work, but from the extended network of relatives and family friends who'd been recruited to their cause. Aunt Patricia called Tuesday morning. "I don't know what happened between you and your mother," she began, "but family is family. Honey, whatever it is, it can't be worth all this drama." Uncle Ray tried Wednesday afternoon. "Your dad wouldn't have wanted this. He always said family comes first." Thursday brought a call from Mrs. Henderson, my mother's longtime friend. "I'm sure there are 2 sides to every story, dear, but your poor mother is just heartbroken. She doesn't understand what she did wrong." Each call followed the same script: minimize the conflict, invoke family loyalty, place the burden of reconciliation on my shoulders. No one asked what had actually happened. No one seemed interested in my side of the story. They just wanted me to fix whatever was broken so their comfortable narratives could remain intact. I documented each call, noting the time, the caller, and the specific manipulation tactics used. The file was growing thick with evidence of a coordinated campaign designed to gaslight me back into compliance. The group chat, which I'd left but could still see through Curtis's girlfriend's Instagram stories, had been rebranded again. First, it was Family Unity SOS, then Healing Our Hearts, and finally, Aileen, Please Come Home. They were performing their grief for an audience, crafting a narrative where I was the prodigal daughter who'd inexplicably abandoned her loving family. The financial reality was beginning to hit them. Curtis posted a GoFundMe for his unexpected financial hardship. Velma started selling items on Facebook Marketplace, items I recognized as gifts I'd given her over the years. Zanea's social media shifted from family celebration to subtle hints about difficult times and prayer requests. They were learning what it cost to fund their lifestyles without their unpaid bank account, and instead of examining their behavior or taking responsibility for their choices, they were escalating their efforts to manipulate me back into place. Friday evening brought the most sophisticated attempt, yet a video message from Curtis's 5-year-old son, my nephew, tearfully asking why Aunt Aileen didn't love him anymore. Using a child as emotional ammunition was a new low, even for them. I forwarded the video to my attorney and blocked every number that had participated in the campaign. They wanted a reaction. They wanted drama, emotion, proof that they could still control my feelings and choices. What they got was documentation and silence. The confrontation I'd been expecting finally arrived on a cold Saturday morning in November. 3 months after my birthday dinner, that never happened. I was enjoying coffee and planning a trip to Santa Fe, my first vacation in years that wasn't built around someone else's needs, when the buzzer rang. Not the polite single ring of a delivery or neighbor, but the aggressive, repeated buzzing of someone who had no intention of being ignored. Through my peephole, I could see all three of them, Velma, Curtis, and Zanea, arranged in formation like they'd planned this assault. Which, of course, they had. I opened the door but didn't step aside. "What do you want? We need to talk," Velma said, pushing past me before I could object. The others followed, Curtis's jaw set in the stubborn line I remembered from his teenage years, Zania clutching her phone like a security blanket. "You can't just cut us off," Curtis began without preamble. "We're family. You don't get to destroy everything Dad built because you're having some kind of breakdown." A breakdown. I remained standing while they arranged themselves on my furniture like an invading army. "Is that what we're calling it when someone stops enabling your financial irresponsibility? You left us with nothing." Zanea's voice cracked with the kind of performance emotion she'd perfected in high school drama club. "The mortgage payment is due. Curtis is facing eviction, and Mom can barely afford groceries. All because you decided to be selfish." The word hung in the air between us. Selfish. For years, I'd shaped my life around avoiding that accusation, bending myself into impossible configurations to prove my worth through endless giving. Now, hearing it applied to my decision to stop funding their dysfunction, it sounded almost absurd. "Show me the eviction notice," I said calmly. Curtis's face flushed. "What? If you're facing eviction, show me the legal notice. Show me the past due rent statements. Show me any evidence at all that this crisis is real and not just another manipulation." "You can't be serious," Velma interjected. "He's your brother. Since when do you require documentation to help family?" "Since I discovered you forged my signature to steal my inheritance." The silence that followed was absolute. They'd known I might find out eventually, but they'd clearly hoped to manipulate me back into compliance before the discovery became a problem. "That was a misunderstanding," Velma said finally. "A paperwork error." "A felony," I corrected. "A deliberate, criminal act that I've reported to the authorities." Curtis stood up abruptly, his face dark with anger. "You called the cops on your own family. I called my attorney when my own family committed fraud against me." "Dad would be ashamed of you," Zanea said, her voice sharp with cruelty. "He always said family comes first, and you've turned your back on everything he valued." The mention of my father, their final weapon, the emotional manipulation they'd held in reserve, should have devastated me. A year ago, it would have. But now, with the clarity that comes from distance and documentation, I could see it for what it was, one last desperate attempt to weaponize my love against me. "Dad also said that respect is earned, not demanded," I replied. "And that character is what you do when no one is watching. You've shown me your character. This is mine." Velma's composure finally cracked. "You're destroying this family, everything we built, everything we are. You're tearing it all down because you can't handle not being the center of attention for 5 minutes?" "I was never the center of attention," I said quietly. "I was the bank account that funded it." Curtis moved closer, his body language shifting into something more aggressive. "You think you're better than us now? Think you can just walk away and leave us to clean up the mess?" "What mess?" I asked. "The mess of paying your own bills, of taking responsibility for your own choices, of living within your own means." "We're family," he shouted, close enough now that I could smell the alcohol on his breath. "That means something. You can't just decide we don't matter." I reached for my phone, my thumb hovering over 911. "You need to leave, now." "Or what?" Curtis's voice carried a threat that made my skin crawl. "You'll call the cops on us again. Add that to your collection of betrayals." I pressed the number and lifted the phone to my ear. 911, what's your emergency?" "We need to report a domestic disturbance," I said, my voice steady despite the adrenaline flooding my system. 3 people have forced their way into my apartment and are becoming aggressive. The effect was immediate. Velma grabbed Curtis's arm, pulling him toward the door. We're leaving, she said quickly. This isn't over. Aileen, you can't run from family forever. I'm not running, I replied as they filed toward the exit. I'm walking away. There's a difference. Zanea paused at the threshold, her face twisted with a combination of hurt and hatred. When you're old and alone with no one who loves you, remember that you chose this. I am choosing this, I said. For the first time in my life, I'm choosing myself. The door closed behind them with a definitive click. I turned the deadbolt and activated the chain, then called back the dispatcher to let them know the immediate threat had passed, but that I wanted the incident documented. In the silence that followed, I didn't feel victory or relief or even sadness. I felt something cleaner and more powerful certainty. They had shown me exactly who they were when their access to my resources was threatened, and I had shown them exactly who I was becoming. Someone who knew her worth, someone who wouldn't be bought, manipulated, or threatened into compliance. Someone who had finally learned the difference between being alone and being free. The restraining order was filed Monday morning. By Wednesday, the criminal investigation into the property fraud had formally begun. My attorney assured me that the evidence was overwhelming forged signatures, fraudulent notarization, and a clear pattern of financial abuse documented through years of bank records and communications. They'll likely try to negotiate a plea to avoid jail time, she explained during our final meeting. But the civil remedies are already in place. They can't contact you, can't access any of your accounts, and can't make any claims on your financial support. I walked out of the law office feeling lighter than I had in years, not because I'd won some battle against my family, but because I'd finally stopped fighting a war that was never mine to win. The days that followed took on a different rhythm. I woke up without immediately checking my phone for crisis text or urgent financial requests. I made coffee without calculating how much I could afford to lend someone this week. I planned my evenings around my own interests instead of other people's emergencies. The silence where their chaos used to live wasn't empty. It was spacious. Room for thoughts that weren't defensive strategies. Room for dreams that weren't contingency plans. Room for a version of myself I'd almost forgotten existed. 2 weeks after the restraining order took effect, I received a letter forwarded through my attorney, Velma's handwriting on cream-colored stationery, the kind she saved for important occasions. Aileen, I know you think we don't love you, but you're wrong. We're family. That has to count for something. I've made mistakes. We all have. But cutting us off completely isn't the answer. Dad wouldn't have wanted this. Please call me. We can work this out. Love, Mom. I read it twice, then filed it with the other documentation. The letter was masterfully crafted, just enough acknowledgement of wrongdoing to seem reasonable, just enough emotional manipulation to trigger guilt, just enough family mythology to make me question my choices. A year ago, it might have worked. Now, I could see it clearly not an apology, but another transaction. They still weren't offering to change their behavior, to make amends for the fraud, to take responsibility for their actions. They were offering me the same deal they'd always offered: come back and pretend nothing happened. Return to being their unpaid emotional and financial support system. Accept invisibility in exchange for the illusion of belonging. I threw the letter away and booked my trip to Santa Fe. The apartment felt different now that it was truly mine. I rearranged the furniture, bought plants, hung art that I loved instead of keeping the walls neutral in case someone criticized my choices. I cooked elaborate meals for myself, took long baths, read books that had been gathering dust for months. I also started therapy, not because I was broken, but because I wanted to understand how I'd allowed myself to become so lost in other people's needs that I'd forgotten my own. Aaron Martinez helped me see the patterns that had started in childhood, the subtle ways I'd been taught that my value lay in my usefulness rather than my inherent worth. Families create roles, she explained during one of our sessions: the achiever, the rebel, the caretaker, the scapegoat. These roles can become so entrenched that family members can't imagine functioning without them. When you stepped out of your assigned role, it threatened the entire system. So they're not going to just accept this and move on. Probably not immediately. Change is threatening to systems that depend on stability, even unhealthy stability. But that's not your responsibility to manage anymore. She was right. 3 months after my birthday dinner, that never happened. They were still trying to pull me back into the old dynamic. Extended family members continued to reach out with concerns and invitations to mediate. Social media posts hinted at family struggles and mysterious betrayals. A few mutual friends awkwardly mentioned that they'd heard I was going through something difficult. Each attempt to re-engage was documented and ignored. I wasn't angry anymore. Anger required emotional investment, and I'd withdrawn my investment completely. I felt something cleaner: indifference. They had become people I used to know, characters in a story I'd finished reading. 6 months later, I was sitting in a cafe in Santa Fe, laptop open, working on the book I'd started the night of my abandoned birthday dinner. What I Owe Myself had grown from a single document into a full memoir, not about my family's dysfunction, but about the journey back to myself. The morning sun streamed through the cafe windows, painting everything in warm gold. Around me, other people worked and talked and laughed, creating the kind of ambient community I'd never experienced in my old life. No one here knew my history or expected anything from me. Igason. I was just another customer, another human being pursuing her own projects and interests. My phone buzzed with a text from Mara. "How's the writing retreat going?" "Perfect," I typed back. Exactly what I needed. And it was. The distance from Denver had given me perspective on just how far I'd traveled, not in miles, but in self-respect. The woman who'd sat alone at that restaurant table 6 months ago had been desperately hoping for scraps of attention from people who'd already decided she didn't matter. The woman typing in this sunny cafe knew she mattered regardless of who else recognized it. I'd made new friends, people who knew me only as I was now, not as the exhausted caretaker I used to be. I'd started dating again, meeting people who were interested in my thoughts and dreams rather than my bank account. I'd even reconnected with old friends I'd lost touch with during the years when family crises consumed all my emotional energy. The book was nearly finished, and early readers had responded with messages that made my heart full. This helped me recognize patterns in my own family. I finally understand why I felt so drained after every family gathering. Thank you for showing me it's okay to choose myself. My story was helping other people find their own voices, their own courage to step away from relationships that diminished them. The pain I'd experienced was being transformed into something useful, something healing. I closed the laptop and walked outside, breathing in the crisp mountain air. A year ago, I would have been planning my day around other people's needs, calculating how much time and money and emotional energy I could spare for the latest family crisis. Today, I was planning a hike, then dinner with a new friend, then an evening of reading for pleasure. The difference wasn't just in my schedule, it was in my entire sense of what was possible. For the first time in my adult life, I understood the difference between being alone and being lonely. Alone was a choice, a space I'd created and curated and filled with things that nourished me. Lonely was what I'd felt surrounded by people who saw me only as a resource. My phone rang as I reached my rental car. unknown number, but with a Colorado area code. For a moment, I hesitated. Then I declined the call and blocked the number. Whatever emergency or manipulation or final attempt at reconciliation it represented, it belonged to my old life. I drove through the mountains with the windows down, music playing, thinking about the woman I was becoming. She was stronger than the woman who'd tried so hard to earn love through endless giving. She was wiser than the woman who'd mistaken being needed for being valued. She was freer than the woman who'd shaped herself around other people's expectations. She knew that love wasn't something you had to pay for, that family was something you could choose, that belonging started with belonging to yourself. Back in my hotel room that evening, I opened the laptop one more time and wrote the final paragraph of my book. I used to think that walking away from family was the hardest thing I'd ever do. I was wrong. The hardest thing was staying so long in relationships that diminished me, trying to earn a love that was never really available. Walking away wasn't abandonment, it was reclamation. I didn't lose my family when I set boundaries and demanded respect. I found myself, and for the first time in my life, that was enough. I saved the document and closed the computer. Tomorrow, I would start submitting the manuscript to publishers. Tomorrow, I would continue building a life based on my own values and desires. Tomorrow, I would wake up belonging fully to myself. Tonight, I would celebrate how far I'd come from that empty table, that forged signature, that moment when I'd finally realized that sometimes the most loving thing you can do is refuse to enable someone else's dysfunction. I'd learned to set a table for one without feeling diminished by it. I'd learned that the right people would always find a way to join me, and the wrong people would always find excuses to stay away. Most importantly, I'd learned that I was worth showing up for by others. Yes, but first and most importantly, by myself. The last seat at every table would always be mine. Son de ci. The end.